This problem seeks to introduce three key concepts in microeconomics: opportunity cost, production possibilities frontier, and the comparative advantage. The players in the problem are two ladies, Kristen and Anna, who run a small business in which they make wristbands and potholders. The table shows that Anna can produce more wristbands per hour and more potholders per hour than does Kristen. Anna can produce 15 wristbands per hour, whereas Kristen can produce 12. Anna can produce 3 potholders per hour, whereas Kristen can produce 2. They both work 20 hours each at production, and the first question is, how many potholders can they make if they work for the full 20 hours? How many wristbands can they make by working the full 20 hours? If they split their time 10 hours each between the two activities, what is the total amount of output they would produce? If they choose to specialize, one in producing wristbands and the other producing potholders, how many units of each will they produce after 20 hours? Is there a way to figure out the maximum quantity that can be produced, or the best quantity if they specialize? In the oversimplified world in which we are operating here, each individual has two things that she can do, and there are two individuals in our problem. So the opportunity cost of doing one activity will be the quantity of the other activity that is foregone. The textbook definition of opportunity cost is the best alternative that we give up or forego when we make a choice or a decision. Let us work with a simpler version of this problem to start with, and we're going to allow Anna to be better at doing one activity and Kristen to be better at doing the second activity. In this variant of the problem, Anna is better at producing wristbands, 15 versus 12 for Kristen, and Kristen is better at producing potholders, 3 relative to 2. We say that Anna has an advantage, an absolute advantage, in producing wristbands, and Kristen has an absolute advantage in producing potholders. With 20 hours available, we can see that Kristen can produce 240 wristbands or 60 potholders, whereas Anna can produce 300 wristbands or 40 potholders. In other words, we take the output per hour and multiply by the number of hours to get to the maximum quantity. We define the opportunity cost of one thing as the amount of the other thing that must be given up to get the first thing. So in order to get 40 potholders, Anna has to give up the possibility of producing 300 wristbands. 300 divided by 40 is 7.5, so we say that each potholder has an opportunity cost of 7.5 wristbands. Likewise for Kristen, in order to produce 60 potholders, she must give up the possibility of producing 240 wristbands. So for each potholder that Kristen will produce, she has to give up the possibility of producing 4 wristbands. So the opportunity cost of one potholder for Kristen is 4 wristbands. The opportunity cost of one potholder for Anna is 7.5 wristbands. It is clear that it costs Anna more to produce a potholder than it costs Kristen. Indeed, if Anna needed potholders, she would be better off buying them from Kristen, because it would cost Kristen less to produce each potholder than it would cost Anna in terms of the foregone opportunity. And therefore, we say that Kristen has a comparative advantage in producing potholders. We earlier said she had an absolute advantage. She could do it faster. But she has a comparative advantage. In other words, compared to Anna, Kristen is faster in relative terms at producing potholders. To be relatively faster at one means you're relatively slower at the other. Not absolutely slower, but relatively slower. Let us now introduce the concept of the production possibilities frontier. Before we get to that definition, however, we want to understand what production possibilities are. And it's pretty straightforward. Production possibilities, what is possible in production. We just said that Anna could produce 300 wristbands or 40 potholders, Kristen could produce a maximum of 240 wristbands or 60 potholders. If we were to sketch a two-dimensional graphical analysis, put in wristbands and potholders on the two axes. In this case, we're going to put wristbands on the vertical axis and potholders on the horizontal axis. It really doesn't matter how we do it, but this is how I prefer to show this analysis. I like to put the larger number on the vertical axis. My reasoning, though, is that I prefer for the slope to be a whole number, if possible, rather than a fraction. It's just easier to speak in terms of whole numbers than fractions. So in this particular analysis, we said that Anna could produce 300 wristbands or 40 potholders. I show 300 wristbands on the vertical axis. When we specialize in producing wristbands, when she specializes in producing potholders, the maximum quantity is 40. So the slope of this line intersecting 300 on the vertical axis and 40 on the horizontal axis is a rise of 300 divided by a run of 40, and that slope is going to be 7.5. We interpret this to say the opportunity cost of potholders is 7.5 wristbands. Or said differently, for each potholder that Anna wants to produce, she gives up the possibility of producing 7.5 wristbands. Let us look at the data for Kristen. 240 wristbands when she specializes in wristband production, or 60 potholders when she specializes in producing potholders. For each potholder Kristen produces, she needs to give up producing 4 wristbands. The opportunity cost of each potholder for Kristen is 4 wristbands foregone or given up. So again, the simplest way to determine the opportunity cost of the good on the horizontal axis, in this case potholders, is by the slope of the line that shows the 2 points of specialization. 240 divided by 60 equals 4. 300 divided by 40 equals 7.5. On the horizontal axis is potholders. To get one more potholder, Kristen needs to give up 4 wristbands in production, and Anna 7.5 wristbands. Part B of our question asks us to determine the quantities of the 2 products to be produced in a 20-hour week when each woman specializes in the good in which she has a comparative advantage. In this particular case, we saw that Anna could produce more wristbands than Kristen. Kristen could produce more potholders than Anna, and therefore Anna had the comparative advantage in producing wristbands, and Kristen had the comparative advantage in producing potholders. Since Anna's potholders cannot be produced more cheaply, Kristen gets to produce potholders. In other words, Anna has a higher cost of producing potholders, and therefore Kristen produces potholders because she has a relatively lower cost. We can show that when they specialize in production, more goods will be obtained than if they divided their time 50-50 percentage-wise, and each lady produced both goods. So we take the maximum quantities that they could produce and divide them by 2 for half of the time, and we see that Anna would have produced 150 wristbands. We should have had Kristen producing 30 potholders in her 10 hours, and Anna 20 potholders in her 10 hours of producing potholders. The total is going to be 50, and the joint totals would have been 270 wristbands and 50 potholders, which is clearly inferior to 300 wristbands and 60 potholders. We conclude then that cooperating and specializing will yield a higher level of output jointly than if they both operated independently. Let us return to the original problem, where Anna can do everything faster than Kristen, and now we're going to introduce a concept called a double absolute advantage. In producing both products faster, we say that Anna has a double absolute advantage over Kristen. In spite of this, Kristen has the comparative advantage in producing the second product. Even though she cannot do anything faster than Anna, she does still have a comparative or relative advantage. There's one thing that she should do, and there's one thing that Anna should do. So we can see the maximum quantities that can be produced by these two women when they allocate 20 hours to either activity. Anna can produce 300 wristbands or 60 potholders. Kristen can produce 240 wristbands or 40 potholders. We return to the concept of opportunity cost, given as the slope of a production possibilities curve or production possibilities frontier. In defining the possibilities for production, we should have mentioned earlier that the line joining the two points of specialization is called the production possibilities frontier or the production possibilities curve. In this case, we are assuming that there's a constant opportunity cost, in which case for every extra unit of potholders, the amount of wristband production given up is going to be always the same. That explains the constant slope. In reality, it very well could be the case that the production possibilities frontier is a convex set. That means that it is going to look more like a half moon or quarter moon. Of course, we can explain why the production possibilities curve is linear or why it might have an increasing opportunity cost. This is another concept that needs to be elaborated on. For this lecture, let us assume that production possibilities trade-offs will always be constant. In other words, the production process involves constant opportunity costs. Notice that in the case where Anna is absolutely better at producing both products, we are defining the opportunity cost again as the slope of the production possibilities frontier, and we're saying that the cost or the foregone opportunity from producing additional potholders is the quantity of wristband production that is given up for each additional unit of potholders. Alternatively, we can say that to go from 0 potholders to 40 potholders, Kristen must give up the possibility of producing 240 wristbands, so she gives up 240 to produce 40, so the opportunity cost of each potholder is 6 wristbands given up or foregone. In the case of Anna, she can produce 60 potholders in the allocated time or 300 wristbands. To produce 60 potholders means she gives up producing the 300 wristbands, so each potholder costs her 5 wristbands in production. The opportunity cost of potholders for Anna is 5. The opportunity cost of potholders for Kristen is 6. Anna has the lower opportunity cost of producing potholders, therefore Anna should specialize in producing potholders because her cost is lower than Kristen's cost of producing the same potholders. In the case where one individual has a double absolute advantage, in other words, can do both activities better than the second person, the question arises, is there a basis for cooperation? The answer is yes. In this case, the individual who is faster at doing both activities will let the person who is slower work on the thing that the second person can do relatively faster. Then the first person will help out the second person. So the first person will do both activities, and the second person will do the one in which she is relatively faster or relatively better in production. Because Anna is absolutely faster at producing both wristbands and potholders, we find out that Kristen has the higher opportunity cost of producing potholders, which means she has a lower opportunity cost of producing wristbands. So Kristen should specialize in wristband production, and Anna will diversify her activities. She will produce all of the potholders for the group, but then she will take some of her time away from potholder production and produce wristbands. So Anna, if she is relatively better at doing both activities, will end up doing both activities. This is an interesting way to remember the comparative advantage when you have a double absolute advantage. If you have a double absolute advantage, you will produce both goods. So Anna will produce potholders for the group, and then she will take some time away from potholder production and boost Kristen's wristband production. We're trying to make sure we get to a larger total quantity when there is partial specialization than when there is no specialization. In our numerical example, we can get to 270 wristbands and also 54 potholders, which is higher than the quantity we would have had if the two ladies operated on their own.